Welcome, and thanks for joining us for this, what I would consider an important discussion on how the world has changed, both for users and for security and information technology personnel. The world changed. I mean, the whole bottom line is things changed with this COVID and with everything else that's going on, our response to COVID. So the world's changed, and so has your workspace. With the workspace changing, we need to have a discussion about what are we doing. This is not a technical discussion. I'm your presenter. My name is Chuck McGann. I'm a certified Chief Information Security Officer. I have a CISSP, a CISM, an IAM. I teach for EC Council. I teach the Certified CISO class. I'm the Master Instructor. I'm the retired CISO for the U.S. Postal Service. I acted in that position for 5 years, and I was a technology manager in the Postal Service for 22 years. So I have a pretty good handle on where technology has been, and hopefully a pretty good handle on where we're going. I'm an independent cybersecurity consultant, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer, of the McGann Group. Several other things about me is I just finished teaching the Certified CISO class. I've done 5 or 6 this year, and some of the information I'm going to share with you is coming from the attendees of those classes. What are some of the things that they're seeing? How are they responding to their environments changed? So again, the world changed, and here's what we need. Here's where we're going to start. What the heck is going on? This is not going to be a political discussion. We will talk no politics at all. So it's not anything to do with he said, she said, we didn't, we did. Okay, so what happens is all of a sudden virus hits. I was in Washington State, actually when the virus hit, the lockdown occurred. All of a sudden it was stay-at-home lockdown. What does that mean to people? It means you can't go out. It means that you are supposed to quarantine. It means that you now all of a sudden had better be prepared for everything. And if you couldn't go back into your office, if you couldn't go back into your workspace, what were you going to do? Social distancing orders were issued, not being within 6 feet, got to wear a mask. But work must go on for your companies to survive. Work must go on for you to economically survive. You've got to get paid. People need to work. On the other side of that, if you're a consumer, you have frustration over services and delays. You know, my product's not here. I call somebody, I'm put on hold for 30 minutes because the call centers don't have the capability to have adjusted to this lockdown order. You know, deliveries of services and resources are constrained. They can't come in from overseas. Ships were out, ships were blocked from coming into harbors. People couldn't produce product because they couldn't get raw materials. There's all sorts of issues that trickle down into affecting your environment and certainly making the world change. Securing the environment, though, from the security professional's standpoint and your organizational requirements is a must. We must be able to secure the environment going to this remote workforce and trying to deal with this environment of change. So will we return to normal? I can't tell you that we will. I don't know what normal is going to be next week. I don't know what normal is going to be tomorrow. I don't know what normal is going to be next year. My guess is, though, that what was normal on December 31st in 2019 will no longer be normal in August or September. So some of the things that we talked about with participants in classes, when they talked about stay at home and lockdown, no travel, no socialization, education's now online. Everybody's searching for answers and a cure. Is social distancing the right thing? Mask, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Is it safe? Is it not safe? What are the things? What's the information portal? Where am I getting my information? How am I getting my information? And is the information accurate? Is it flawed? Has it been misinterpreted, or has it been, how should we say, has the integrity of the information been compromised on some of the sites that you're getting your information from? Regardless of that, though, all of a sudden we started to work from home. Everybody wanted to work from home. If you were not an essential employee and didn't have to physically go to your place of work, whether it be a grocery store clerk, a bus driver, sanitation worker, electrical worker, utilities environments and such, work from home. Really, what does work from home mean? And one of the things that we talked about with the various people over the last 4 months that we've had these conversations is, did they have a policy in place to be able to allow work from home? There were technology issues. We had confidentiality issues and concerns, privacy concerns, data protection issues, trust issues, and then certainly family impact. And we're going to talk about each one of these in order, or not necessarily in order of importance, because to me, family impact, quite frankly, is the height, and that's why I left it for last. High family impact was certainly critical as you started to now all of a sudden collapse your environment and everybody was in close proximity. So policy issues. Does your current policy allow for remote connectivity? Some companies that I've talked to, the answer is no, we don't allow remote connectivity. We don't allow people to work from home. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, but most of it has to do with the ability to support the infrastructure and the desire to not provide, I don't say the desire, but the not provisioning of internet services, not provisioning of computing process, and then again, just not wanting to have to manage that type of scenario. So policy didn't allow that. And then it turns around into, even if we did allow it, what kind of authentication are we using? And did our current authentication, which often used your building access as your first line of defense into accessing a system, your building authentication, you were no longer in the building. So that first line of defense is your physical access card badge getting in the building and get to your work environment or your workstation. That was gone. That didn't matter anymore. It didn't exist. So did your authentication support remote users at all levels of the organization? Most companies had some remote logon capability. And most companies, when they issued that remote logon capability, because it's been a standard for a while, use multi-factor authentication. It could be a token, it could be a call back to or a call back to a phone, an email back to an email, address and whatever. But most companies did have some level of remote capability. But was it scalable? Did it scale to be able to handle another, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, a couple of hundred people? Was it scalable? And then how quickly could you adjust? And then, how difficult is it to adjust policy? Who authorizes the changes? One of the companies that I talked to said we had a policy issue. What we did was issue a risk acceptance. They sat there and said, we're going to issue a risk acceptance because of this pandemic. And he wrote it up. Here's the risk acceptance, and here's how we're going to handle it. So here's the risk acceptance, and everybody has to sign this risk acceptance if they're going to work from home. And that was fine. Again, you don't want to be, policy should be relatively dynamic. You don't want to be changing policy every week, every month, because it may require multiple approvals from various organizations. So policy approvals in some instances, and I know, in my experience, some instances it's been up to 6 to 9 months to get a policy approved when you have multiple organizations have to review it, have to approve it, make the changes, and then you start back all over again. So again, most of the companies that we've talked to have said we are going to use a risk acceptance process to allow our workers to work from home. And then when we went through this, it's like, well, could the process providing access handle the multi-factor credential issuance? What was going to be, were you going to try and issue tokens to everyone? Were you going to use something like phone factor? Were you going to just validate through an email? There's all sorts of products out there, and I don't endorse any product, but how are you going to provision the multi-factor credential issuance? How quickly could you do it? And how, quite frankly, robust was it going to be? And then when we got all of that done, we got the credential, we got the policy changed, we got the multi-factor credentials issued. We had to make some decisions. Could we monitor access and activities of the remote users and collect data for the required audit trails? How were we going to get the event logs from these end users? And quite frankly, were we going to issue them equipment? And we'll talk about that on another slide. Or were we going to allow them to use their own, a BYOD? And if we were going to allow a BYOD, how are we going to monitor that access? All right, so it made a big difference, and we had to ask those questions. And some users that we've talked to, or some security people that we've talked to, said we made a decision that we were going to let some of this go at the endpoint and just pick it up on the network side, to make sure that nothing was going wrong on the network side inside the organization. So we talked about, let's get into the technology issues. And again, not deep technology. I don't do deep technology discussions. Secure connections for all devices. How are we going to do that? Are we going to put agents on personal devices? And how are we going to deliver that? And then again, People are reluctant to have the organization put agents on their devices. Oh, you're monitoring me. This is my personal device. You want me to work from home? Give me equipment. You want me to use my network? Okay, well, all right, I'll let you use my network, but my network's not robust. So, agents and things, but how do you do that? And then once you make some of those decisions that the agent works, what kind of collaboration tools are you going to use? If in fact you had to do, meetings and general collaboration conversations with developers and functional areas, joint design kinds of things, would you use Teams, Slacks, go to meetings, etc.? Which one were you going to use? And then, did people have the education? Did people know how to use these things? And you're talking about, remember, people who were in fact mostly supported users inside of a facility that had support, usually at the drop of a hat. They pick up the phone, hey, I don't understand this, or they could ask their cubicle neighbor, I don't understand how Teams is working, I don't understand Slack, help me out. And they could get support, from someone in their facility. Now all of a sudden support wasn't available to them. They'd have to pick up the phone. If somebody was at the other end, you had some lost productivity. There was all sorts of challenges with that. But again, in the security people that we've talked to since March, it kind of has worked its way through. And again, we're now into August. So about 6 months, 5 months later, 6 months later. So we're now getting all these things nailed down. Once we agreed to use personal devices, we wanted to make sure that we validated the appropriate security on the personal devices. And everyone, well, I won't say everyone, there are multiple security, agents out there that people can use, from AT&T, from Norton, from McAfee, from any numbers of ones that are provided out there. Kaspersky is another one that comes to mind. Again, how do we make sure that our own internal staff understands the nuances of those and the feeds from those personal devices? And then how do we get that information back? And are they configured appropriately to detect things that are going to happen from those devices, potentially impacting our network? Then we talked to multiple people, and I can tell you this firsthand. We're running a couple of courses, the network service issues. With VPN requirements, you have Avast, Symantec, Cisco, et cetera. There's a multitude of VPNs out there. Most people, I'm going to tell you, most people don't use them. Most companies do, but most people don't use them on a daily basis, unless they're transferring data, specifically protected data. But most people don't use a VPN when they're just surfing the web. Their bank, the bank would fire one up for them, be a secure connection. But again, how do I load these VPN requirements down on those machines? And how do people make sure that they trust that this is going to be, a valid or tool that doesn't impact my personal use of my personal machine? We found a couple of different areas, specifically the bandwidth contention at home and at the ISPs was a significant challenge for people. If your kids are home because they're from, they can't go to school, they're online trying to do their schoolwork. So most people don't have, 200 megabit connections, and most people aren't running, super high speeds, and most most ISPs in rural areas aren't providing that level. So if you have, in the rural areas, we had some real bandwidth contention, and we had to figure out, companies had to figure out a way to make sure that happens. When you work 8 to 5 and your child has to go to school 9 to 2, there is certainly some contention there. And oh, by the way, if someone wants to watch, streaming video or something, and you have different functions that are going on. I talked to one person that they actually had to shut their security system off, all of their remote cameras off, had to shut multiple devices off. They're, I hate to say this, but they're Alexa and Amazon Echo devices, and they had to shut those off in order for their bandwidth to be good enough for them to work. And when one of their children fired up, a laptop to get on, it impacted. They lost their connection. It impacted their ability. They started to pixelate. Their content started to break down, and they had to go back and say, listen, I need this for work, and the child was like, I need this for school. So bandwidth contention at home is one of the things that's really a consideration. It's a consideration to this day because the ISPs couldn't scale up fast enough. It was never planned, and you have, again, even some urban areas where old wire is used out there, and it's just not as robust a connection as it needs to be to support this work from home now new mandate. Backup connections, we talked about mobile hotspots. Should it be company funded? Is it company managed? Again, do you put your phone on mobile hotspot, and at some point, even if you have unlimited data usage, at some point your carrier will throttle you back down. And then once the mobile network is filled up, you're in contention on the mobile network as well. So you have to, again, that's one of the considerations that we've had to deal with, and ISPs are coming up to speed. They're adding more bandwidth. They're changing out their environments. But again, this is not something that we really planned on. It's not something that was, we need this right away and snap your fingers and the bandwidth comes alive. It doesn't work that way. Fiber's making its way into a lot of environments, except it still takes time to get fiber, to the home. To the businesses, yes, but to the home, it's a different story. And from the home to the business, that's where the contention starts to lie. And then, of course, we had to worry about possible bridge connections. Were the home machines connected somewhere and then bridging into the environment, even though it's a VPN connection, was my machine connected one way, and then could someone pass through my home machine right on in through my VPN connection up into my environment, my work environment? So you had to make sure that was something that was considered by people. So that's kind of the technology side. Again, there are multiple VPNs out there. Pick one, or hopefully your company has picked one or two that, quite frankly, you can educate your own support people on. And also remember, on the technology side, if something was wrong, if there was a configuration issue, it's not like you could send a technology person to the desktop. All of a sudden now you had to have a technology person reach out on the phone. If you had a technology person available, one of your techs, if you had a tech available, reach out on the phone, put on go use remote access to tie into someone's machine, work with them on the corrective actions, and then log back out. So again, that also created network contention, but it also changed the dynamic of how quickly people were getting help and how quickly we could fix a problem. So that's where you can go back to services were kind of constrained and responses were delayed. But that's kind of the technology side. Again, on the rules for remote access and security from non-corporate devices, we had to make sure that what are the rules? Can I pass through and surf the web through my VPN, my corporate VPN? What was the corporation going to allow me to do? You wanted to use my device, what are you giving me? Those are things, remote access from corporate devices. If you had signed me a corporate device, could I use that corporate device to have my son or daughter do schoolwork if I wasn't using it? And could I use it to stream content at night? What were the restrictions on these devices? We had to make sure that we set this all down. And then again, we really had to make sure that, quite frankly, that people understood the limitations, and we had to, socialize the limitations with people and say, hey, here's what we know, that we're in this unique situation. We know that we have these unique challenges. We know that there are going to be issues. If you make a mistake, we have to make sure that if we made a mistake, that people weren't afraid to lose their jobs. They weren't afraid that they were going to get fired because they made a mistake, that that unintentionally something went wrong. Again, event logging from all devices. That was, again, traffic that had to come up the network and was going to take bandwidth. How are we going to make sure the software updates for corporate devices, and patches were delivered? Again, another challenge. Again, another bandwidth contention issue. And you're starting to get a feel for I guess the commonality of the network. And it's always the network's fault, but it's not a fault issue. It's never, in my mind, it's not a fault issue. It's an unplanned. In our BCP, in our business continuity planning, in our BCM, business continuance management, processes in the company, nobody ever said, hey, let's plan for a pandemic. I won't say nobody, because that's a finite. Very rarely did a company plan for a pandemic. Very rarely did a company plan for all of its organization having to work from outside. We had plans for essential personnel to work from home. Everyone had a laptop. Security people all had laptops. They all had VPNs. They all had the available capability. Most of them had, they all had alternate, functions with hotspots and environments like that. But very rarely did a company sit there and guess that their customer service groups and their order taking groups and their response groups were going to be non-resident. So that wasn't in their BCP, but I'm going to tell you it's probably in their BCP now. I'm going to tell you that we all have to rethink our BCP in the space of what can happen. Well, this is, quite frankly, what's the worst that can happen? This is one of the worst things that can happen. And the only other thing, the worst that can happen about this is if we lost all bandwidth, then what? What do we do? And chances are, if we lost all the bandwidth, we lose the phones, because most phones are using IP connectivity. But again, how do we get the software patches down there? How do we make sure the updates are happening? Again, bandwidth contention issues. Sandboxing and inspection of data files prior to production usage. We may not have had a plan for that. We need to make, again, it's something that wasn't planned, and maybe now we need to take a look at that. Again, mobile needs for connections and call center support agent connectivity. Most call centers weren't prepared to roll over. They had a PBX, they had their hub, and there were 100 phone calls attached to that hub, and it rolled through rolled next agent, next agent, next agent. Now all of a sudden, how is it rolled to my home? How does it roll to my mobile device? And I don't, quite frankly, I don't want your help. I don't want your customer service call rolling to my home. So you'd better give me a mobile device. Oh, and I live in a fringe area and my mobile device doesn't have real good connectivity. How am I supporting the customers? How am I supporting the business? We need to make sure that we have figured, some of these challenges out, because again, I don't want my home phone tied up with business work. Now you can sit there and say, if you want to, get paid, if you want to, make sure that you maintain your salary, then you're going to make some compromises. And a lot of people did, but a lot of challenges, occurred with this. People using the phone, kids using the phone, that's, or mobile devices and whatever. So again, most people don't have landlines anymore, at least, in the United States. A lot of people have given them up. So it's all mobile device. And again, my mobile device connectivity may not be what it needs to be to support an organization. But those are some of the considerations that we have had to deal with. And quite frankly, those are ones that we're going to have to deal with from now on. How do I have a call center on a mobile environment? How do I do that? And then how do I monitor that? How do I make sure that the call center is functioning properly and the customers are getting the right support that they need? Confidentiality was another one of the key issues that we talked about with the groups that we had this discussion with. Data exfiltration concerns. Hey, I brought it to my laptop. Now my home laptop. Now I can do anything I want with it. Most people are trustworthy. Most people will do what's the right thing. They always have. They always will. But again, there is a small fringe that will take a look and that this is, hey, I got some information or whatever, and maybe they don't use it for nefarious purposes. Maybe they're just being nosy. Maybe they just, want to see, and I can't imagine if you're a payroll person, maybe you pulled somebody's payroll down and again, it just happens to sit. Shoulder surfing, you need to make sure that you need to have a private area to work. Not everyone was set up to work with the intent of confidentiality as they're doing company business. Most people, a lot of people don't have separate home offices. This was never their plan. They were help desk agents, they were call center agents, they were accounting clerks. How do I find a private area where I have, number one, the confidentiality, but number two, I don't have the interruptions? Customer service issues with PII, PCI. Somebody calls the call center and all of a sudden you have their credit card number, and their credit card number, it might be on a notepad for you. And again, I am not saying any way, shape, or form that anyone would be dishonest or intentionally dishonest, but they roll up that piece of paper and throw it in the trash and move on to something else. Are they shredding it? Did we have policy, or did we advise people how to protect how to protect the confidentiality of the information at home? How did we make sure that people understood, beyond security awareness at the office, that had to be a level of confidentiality and a level of control in their own environments. And again, we talked earlier about the communication challenges with phone, fax, voice over IP. And I was in the middle of teaching a class and my network went down. It just dropped. I mean, I don't know why it dropped. There was, something, this provider did something, it dropped. That meant my phone dropped. That meant my internet connection dropped. That meant, the only connectivity I had at that point was my mobile phone. But again, it took 5 minutes for it to come back up. But that's distressing. That really was distressing for me as an instructor, and certainly was distressing for the students. So, again, what's your backup plan? Do you have a backup plan? Have you told people ahead of time, if I lose you, again, what's our process? And did we maintain some of those processes? Or were we able to maintain those processes of keeping things confidential? In most environments, you would just use your desktop VPN back into an application and keep the application information up on the corporate server and the corporate environment. You wouldn't have that issue. Sometimes, though, you may have had to pull a file down or load a file in order to help a person, and then all of a sudden you have PII information. You might have PCI information, how they paid for a particular product, for you to send them a return capability or to provide them a credit. And again, it's just exposure. It doesn't mean that there's been risk. I mean, it's risk and exposure. It doesn't mean that there's been loss. It just means that there's been risk and exposure that we as security professionals or that we as business people need to make sure that we've had some conversation over in order to protect the employee, the company, and the customer, and say, this is how we are going to handle this. If in fact you take this kind of information, you need to shred it, you need to destroy it, or you need to use an online notepad and get rid of it at that point, delete the notepad. But again, these are things that on the confidentiality side, we have to have had some level of conversation over, or if we have not yet, we need to. All right, don't take people's information if you don't need it. That was always one of the conversations that we had. Don't have information on your system that you don't need, and if get rid of it as soon as you don't need it anymore. So that way you don't have a confidentiality issue. Delete it. If you put it on a piece of paper, shred it, get rid of it. Maintain the confidentiality for the sake of the business, for the sake of the customer, and for your own sake. Data protection issues, again, data exfiltration concerns. Well, how do we protect it if I bring it down to my machine? Ensuring data protection on personal devices. I'm loading it here, a file. Maybe I'm working on an accounting spreadsheet. Maybe I'm working on something. I don't want to download it to my machine so I can do some calculations locally. I'm bringing it down. Again, I know that nobody's going to get on my machine. I know that nobody's going to steal my machine. I know that my machine's protected. Yeah, and the probability is very low, but in some cases, the potential for risk could be pretty high, depending on how you protected your machine. Data management concerns, again, file exfiltration, file replacement, etc. The confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information has to be maintained, and we have to know that a file replacement was authorized, and it does have the integrity through the system that it needs to have. And then again, an inspection of data files prior to production usage, because they are coming from, I'll say it because a potentially non-trusted source, you want to make sure that in fact that file, is in fact accurate. It does have the integrity. It has maintained its confidentiality, and it is available at the right point in time. So again, data protection issues had to be discussed. The people on the phone, or the people that we've polled since March, have said, well, we've been pretty lucky with that. We haven't had any issues. Again, mostly people logging on and doing all their work up on the corporate devices. But then there have been instances where people have pulled data files down and sent them back up, and want to make sure that it came from you, even though it came from a VPN tunnel. Again, the probability is very, very low, but the potential for impact could be high depending on the nature of the data or the application we're talking about. Again, so data protection was key. We talked about technology, we talked about confidentiality, data protection. So let's talk about trust. Let's talk about the trust issues for a second. One of the things that I've encountered when people started working from home, and we did this in the federal space years ago, one of the bigger challenges was, are you really working? Are you really working? Because that's kind of, so unfortunately, sometimes that's that overseer mindset, if you would. If I can't see you working, are you really working? Are you really doing the job? And then I think we've gotten more now into the, I don't have to see you. I just measure you by the volume of work that you are accomplishing, or measure you by the by a deliverable or something, as opposed to by time and time clock. But again, if you're working from home, are you really working? And this becomes a challenge right now, only from the standpoint of, it's not like people can send their kids to school and have this private, quiet environment. It's not like they can send their children to childcare and not have child interruptions. And it's very nice that we want to sit there and say, you must, you must have appropriate childcare. You must have this appropriate time to dedicate to work. That's not the environment today. That world changed. So again, are you really working? Yes, I'm working. My child may be sitting on my lap. My other child may be running in and say, hey, I cut my finger, can you get me a Band-Aid? And again, if you're in the middle of a meeting, you may have to sit there and say, excuse me, I need to go attend to this, or child, hold on, or the child sitting on my lap, you need to be quiet, whatever. But are you really working? Are you dedicating every minute of the 8 hours to supporting the organization? And that was a big trust issue. And unfortunately, I'll say this, unfortunately, is that, I've seen in the past where people who were working from home, who had committed to having committed to having childcare, felt that they could save money by leaving their child at home. Nobody will know that my child's at home, and nobody will know this. And then when it was, at one point we had 3 days of, possible 3 days a week, 3 days of homework, and then 2 days back in the office. And then when we curtailed that back to 1 day, people got upset because all of a sudden they had to find childcare. It's like, it's going to cost me money. I have to find childcare. But you signed an agreement that says you already had childcare and that you didn't have these issues. That was the whole part of working from home. That was the agreement you signed. And again, what's the world changed? Can you do this? Are you monitoring me? How am I making sure that that Chuck is at his keyboard? How am I making sure that Susie, Sally, Bob, Fred? How am I monitoring every keystroke? Are you monitoring me? That means you don't trust me. If you're monitoring me, you don't trust me. And then what are the commitment expectations? Most, obviously I just detailed them. You have a house full. If you have dependent kids, they're not going anywhere. They're home. So what is your expectation of me as an employee versus my expectation of me as a parent? And how do I balance that? So there's some balancing, issues that we have to deal with here as we go through this changing world. And organizations have to understand that, and most organizations do. I've run across multiple organizations. In fact, I was teaching a class 2 weeks ago where I could hear children in the background, and I could, the person will go on mute. And again, he says, I'm really sorry, my kids are home, and I got that. And as an instructor, I have to understand that. As an instructor, I have to deal with that. And as business owners and as business managers, we have to expect that, and we have to deal with that. And quite frankly, most of us have been in that boat at some point in time. We've had kids or have had dependents that needed support, whether they be our parents or some family member have needed support. And we have to understand that there are going to be dependent interruptions. Do we know what they're going to be? I can't tell you. And again, kids running around, whatever, kids do what kids do. That's how they work. But again, am I working? I'm working to the best of my ability. The organization has to trust that the employee is working to their best of the ability, and the employee has to trust that the organization is going to understand that there are contributing factors, that there are influencing factors in the environment that they're in, that maybe there is going to be some background noise, that maybe it is going to take them a couple more minutes to get to the phone. Maybe it is going to take them, you know, 2 minutes to pick it up, or maybe they're going to have to step away from a meeting at some point in time, or maybe a deadline is going to have to get moved because of some other issue, because of some other dependent requirement. There's got to be a level of trust that goes back and forth between the organization and the employee. It's no longer in this new world that we've gone into, there's no longer, this is the hammer, and we're going to do it this way, and this is how it's going to be done. That will not work. Organizations need to understand that at this point in time, employees have now gotten the taste of the freedom, if you would, of being able to do their jobs and yet maintain their household and again, contribute in both areas. So the organization has to trust that the employee is doing the best that they can, but the employee has to have a level of commitment to the organization to, again, to do the best they can. All right, that's the important part. The trust issue is it builds morale. It can undermine an organization if it goes the wrong way. All right, so family impact, everyone needs the network at the same time. Everybody needs the network at the same time. I want to watch streaming content because I'm retired, or my son's here and he wants to do his doctorate program, or he wants to do his master's program. He needs the network. His 6-year-old is here and needs to do his online schooling. If we happen to be in the same house, my spouse may work, my partner may work, and all of a sudden we have bandwidth contentions. Okay, and then there are recreational needs for others not working. They need your attention. If you have young kids, if you have middle-aged kids, you need to have some impact in their lives. You just can't say, I'm going in my home office, don't talk to me till 5 o'clock today. That's unrealistic expectation for any company in today's situation. It is just not going to work. And security people need to understand that there are going to be interruptions this way. Okay, and security people, when they reach out to say, hey, what's going on? How come we're seeing this traffic? Oh, I'm sorry, my kid got on and tried to surf to a particular site while I was on the same machine trying to get some work done. We're going to have to understand those issues, and we're going to have to address them. I talked about bandwidth challenges of sharing, the ISPs challenging supporting challenges for supporting everyone. That's always contentious, and the ISPs need to work from there. And then we have the overloads. And once you have overloads of the network, you have degradation. And once you start dealing with degradation, the frustration starts to mount. And whether the security people can reach back out and get the information they want, or whether you can monitor, all this information, what is it that you absolutely have to have versus what is it you'd like to have to ensure the safety of the environment, or the security of the environment, the security of the information, and the security of the sessions. May have to work with the ISPs to figure out, what it's a balance. And then the last one on here is personal space. Everyone needs personal space. They need personal space to work. And then how do we maintain that personal space? So the family impact of the world having changed can be significant. I read something where the family contention rate, I read somewhere the family contention rate is at an all-time high. People spend too much time together. Families spend too much time together. It becomes a challenge, and all of a sudden, I don't want to be with you anymore. Divorce rates kind of climb or whatever. But again, on the security side, going backwards on the security side, we need to make sure that the connections are secure. We need to make sure that the data coming into an organization has the confidentiality. It's been maintained, the integrity of the information is accurate, and it's available when we need it to be available. The CIA for the security people, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the triad. From the organization standpoint, we need to make sure that we have an understanding of trust and commitment, that we have to trust that the employee is doing the best they can. We have to trust that they're going to not share the information. We're going to have to trust that they'll protect the PCI, PII, and proprietary information as if they were in their office. And that's the expectation that we have to convey. And we sit there and say we shouldn't have to convey that. Well, sometimes a gentle reminder is okay, because people in a different environment might react differently. And then certainly the employee, the person supporting the organization, has to maintain this level of commitment back. I'm going to give you my best. I'm going to do my best to be available to you and to do the work, and to do the work securely, and to protect any information entrusted to me that I bring into this environment, or that I happen to see in my dealings with the work that I would do normally. Just because I'm at home doesn't mean I still don't have the requirement to protect the corporation's information as I would have if I was in the building. Biggest factors we've seen, again, are ISP capabilities and being able to authenticate the users, and adding the agents to their personal machines. That's been the biggest challenge. Provisioning the endpoints, getting the security information back from the endpoints, making sure that the network needs, the ISP can provide the levels of functionality and throughput required. And then the multi-factor authentication. How do I get a token to you? How do I, is it phone, like I said, phone factor, RSA tokens, things like that. How do I get these things to you? Those have been the challenges that people have said to me over the last 5-7 months, whatever it's been, 6 months, 6 months, 5 months, 5 months rather. Those have been the challenges that of the people I've talked to, they've run into. You have competing needs at home, but again, it's the bandwidth, it's the agents, it's the connectivity and the throughput, and making sure that I'm me. So we want to leave you with some takeaways. It's important that you make sure that you review your policy and make any changes or adjustments, either short or long term, you feel you need to make. But it's also important to make sure that your employees are aware that they have some commitment to this, and that you sign a document which says that they're going to they're going to protect the information of your company as if they were on premises. So you want to reinforce the confidentiality and the privacy requirements. Also, we want to validate that the equipment that's being used at home, basically the BYOD equipment, has in fact the protections for the security of the information. It's virus protection, malware protection, so that endpoint doesn't become an attack vector into your own organization. If you've packaged them a VPN solution, or if they're walking away and using your corporate equipment, then that's fine, but you need to make sure that it maintains its up-to-date capabilities. It's also important to consider the family and the spouse and the partner needs during this time. There's a lot of close interaction happening. Children can't go to school, partners can't go to work, families are all clustered together, and there is going to be some contention. There will be challenges of who all uses the equipment at one given point in time, if in fact it's personal equipment. We also want to make sure that we've figured out the bandwidth challenges of sharing, and then both in the home and around the ISP, because as contention grows, as more and more people are working online from home or from remote resources, there's going to be contention with ISPs. I've experienced that. I've had students experience that. The more people that get online, the pipe is only so big, so it's going to have contention in it. So it has to be an understanding that there will be some delays. Also, you want to consider how data will be protected while out of your control. If in fact a file has to be loaded down to be worked on locally, is there the understanding that that file is going to be protected again to the same level that it would be in your office, that it's not going to be left laying around on the dining room table or in the home office to be viewed at by anyone. So you have to make sure that there's an understanding of how to protect this data, and if it doesn't need to be held, then it shouldn't be held. The biggest one here is trust. You have to maintain a level of trust during this time for everyone. For the employee, they know they're going to be monitored, but I think it's important for them to understand why they're being monitored. And that monitoring doesn't need to go as deep as what it might on the on-prem network. You want to make sure that people understand that there's a level of expectation. They're being paid to work. You expect them to work. But on the organization side, there has to be a level of trust that the employee is doing the best that they can. Again, they're trying maybe to balance family. They're trying to balance additional needs of the other residents in the house, or in fact, they are challenged with geographical issues. Rural areas don't get the same services as urban areas. So you need to make sure that there's this level of trust between company and employee, and that should exist no matter what. So again, policy changes, make sure you have people signed up, reinforce the confidentiality, validate the equipment protections. Family and spousal needs are a concern. Bandwidth, if you haven't provided it, it's your ISP, it's local ISP. Making sure that there's VPNs out there, that you have that capability. And again, consider how the data is protected. And then trust. The important one in my mind is trust, that you have to believe that the employee is doing the best that they can during this time, and the employee has to believe that the company is doing what they absolutely need to do during this time to protect, number one, their customers, number two, their employees, but number three, the overall organization, so that it can continue on. With that, we'd like to take questions about the broadcast. Daniel, back to you.